Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to talk about a question that I got from a viewer. He's asking about transitioning to working in aviation maintenance without an FAA certificate. So the question is, do I need an FAA certificate to work in aviation maintenance? Welcome, aviation enthusiasts and dreamers. If we haven't met before, my name is Bruce Bissett. I am an expert in all things airplanes. I'm a 40-year survivor in the aviation industry. I teach avionics, maintenance, aircraft ownership, and FAA regulations. I teach both online and in classrooms. My students come from high school, colleges, repair stations, and the FAA Academy. So let's start a conversation and shed some light on this wild world of aviation. Hey, welcome back, everybody. My name is Bruce Bissett. We are going to cover another question from a viewer who wants to get into aviation maintenance and doesn't exactly know how. And we had a question from him that came in last week. And his question, basically, the bottom line was, need an FAA certificate to work as an avionics technician. And I have to kind of be careful here because it's a yes or no question. And what we're going to do in this video is we're going to go through and get into a little bit of the regulations, what the FAA says, who has to be certificated versus who doesn't, and in which working environment is going to be best for you to get into aviation without actually having an FAA certificate, or specifically an airframe and power plant certificate. Hey, and before we get too much further, please, if you like this video, go ahead and hit like, hit the subscribe bell, and also the notification bell so you get more notifications when I add videos to the website. So moving forward. So the question is, and it's a really good question, is that, do I need a certificate? And I want to start by simply reading his first email to me. And he says, "Good morning, Bruce. I was writing to find out some more on the FAA AET certificate. Am I correct in the fact that it's an entry level and no prior experience is required? I know a little about basic electricity, as I've worked in building maintenance and currently work for a supply house, but I'd like to switch careers back to something more hands-on. Any information is appreciated. Thanks." And he said, "Sincerely." And I said, great question. I get this all the time, especially we talk about when I worked at a college and I had my school, we were talking to students that were thinking about where they wanted to go in the career system for the college. I sold it because I loved my years working in aviation, both as straight avionics. When I first got into the military, I was an avionics technician. I got out of the military and went into an airline as an avionics technician. I did get my A&P because I had owned so many private aircraft with me and my father early on because I had wanted to be a pilot. Know the complete story. But the question is, do I need an FAA certificate to work on aircraft? And that's going to really get back down to what are you doing and what aircraft you're working on. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to go right into the FARs. So the first FAR we're going to talk about is talking about Part 91. Part 91 403 is every airplane's got to comply with that. And it just simply states, basically, the owner-operator of an aircraft is primarily responsible for maintaining that aircraft in an airworthy condition. Okay, so meaning that a person that can sign an aircraft to return to service after maintenance is validating the airworthiness of the aircraft. And we talked about this before, is that, for example, certain people own experimental aircraft, home-built, amateur-built aircraft that they built. Well, the FAA will issue them a repairman certificate. It is an FAA-issued maintenance certificate to do a specific task on a specific aircraft, particularly the aircraft that they built. The FAA understands that, hey, they built the aircraft. They would know more about how the aircraft is constructed. They'd be the best to go through and allow them to do their own yearly inspection on the aircraft. We don't call it annual because annual by definition is that an annual inspection means an aircraft was returned to its airworthy condition. So one FAA certificate that we're only going to talk about right now that could be issued by the FAA is for experimental aircraft only. Can't do anything else. Can't work on type certificated aircraft or air carrier aircraft, so on and so forth. But then it gets down to paragraph B, and I'm actually paraphrasing this chapter, and it says, pretty prohibitive language, right? It says, no person may perform maintenance, preventive maintenance, or alterations on an aircraft other than as prescribed in the subpart and other regulations, including Part 43 of this chapter. In the first paragraph, it talks about compliance with Part 39. Well, Part 39 is talking about airworthiness directives, safety directives, which means these are issued to aircraft that have type certification and there's a safety issue, and the owner-operator must address those problems. And we'll talk about in a couple seconds who can actually do the airworthiness directives, who can correct a problem or safety issue. The second part talks about prescribed in the subpart of this chapter and other applicable regulations that we're going to get in further on. But the big part is Part 43. When we deal with FAR regulations, as a general aviation middle-of-the-run pilot who wants to fly his 172 and have fun doing it, right? We all in aviation, I'm a general aviation pilot, have to comply with 3 basic rules. Everybody does, going all the way from the big air carriers all the way down to the Piper Cub driver. And one, that's Part 21. Part 21 states it's a promise that the FAA has made to the public that the aircraft, Part 21, is properly constructed to meet airworthiness standards. Part 91 are the regulations that we all have to comply with, which talk about operational rules, but also there's a whole section in there on how we as aircraft owners, or like we said here, owner-operator, in this description here, must fly and maintain our aircraft. And then the last part, we all have to comply with Part 43. Now, I'm not going to get too in-depth in these 3 regulations. These are just the 3 regulations that we in aviation have to comply with. And within those 3 regulations, there's certain types of qualifications, if you will, that we allow people to perform maintenance and return to service on aircraft. Now, we're only talking about type certificated aircraft, which is the vast majority of aircraft out there. So let's jump to the next rule. So 91.405, we jumped all the way down into Part 91.405. We're talking about maintenance required. Again, I'm paraphrasing here. There's that first line that says each owner or operator of an aircraft, okay, shall have that aircraft inspected as prescribed in Subpart E. And if we get into Subpart E of Part 91, it talks about all the inspection requirements that have to be done. You know, annual inspections, hourly inspections, things like that. If you want to get into it. This part, and shall, between required inspections, except as provided in paragraph C of this section, that gets into a little bit of air carrier stuff, have discrepancies repaired as prescribed in Part 43. So remember Part 43. Remember that was one of the 3 requirements to be able to fly an airplane. And then the last part of this, and there's more to this maintenance required rules, but paragraph B, shall ensure maintenance personnel make appropriate entries in the aircraft maintenance records indicating the aircraft has been approved for return to service after maintenance. And then when we get into Part 43, we could talk about, you know, the actual entries that have to be done per maintenance that's being done on the aircraft. Also, we get into inspection requirements and what has to be said in those inspection requirements. And again, who can do it? Again, we're just talking about certificates required on the aircraft. Okay, so that's going to take us to the next regulation that actually addresses this thing, and then we're right into 43.3. Now, 43.3, beyond the general items, talks about persons authorized to perform maintenance, preventive maintenance, rebuildings, and alterations, right? Now, 40, except as provided in this section, we'll have a whole video on here that talks about reading and understanding FARs. I think I'm going to have on my online course about an hour-long course on trying to understand how to read regulations. They're supposed to be simple, easy to read, but there are done a little bit of wherefore, how, shall, ats, and by exception to. So once you figure out the system, they're pretty easy to read. So we see in paragraph A, except as provided in this section and section 43.17. So these are exceptions. 43.17 is going to talk about inspections. No person may maintain, rebuild, alter, or perform maintenance on that aircraft, right? So when we get into 4317, we get into other parts of sections. Wow, no person may maintain, rebuild, or alter, perform preventive maintenance on aircraft. That says a lot. Well, nobody can? No, except can. So they're saying in this first paragraph, unless you meet the exception requirements of 4317 and other sections, and here we'll talk about here in a second, you can't work on this aircraft. No person may maintain. And then we'll get into the other exceptions as we keep on going in the paragraph. So who can do it? Well, in it talks about the first and foremost, the holder of a mechanic certificate may perform maintenance right out the bottom. A mechanic certificate. And the way it works is that when the FAA issues a mechanic certificate, within that are 2 ratings that are possible. You could have one or both ratings. You can have an airframe, a power plant, or airframe and power plant. Most of us had ever gone to school. We went and stayed in school in the applications and got our airframe and power plant because we worked on generals in school. And we're talking about 147 school, and we got our airframe training, took our tests, got our authorizations, and then did our power plant tests and authorizations to be able to do the orals and practicals for both ratings. Now, some people who are working in industry, right? I'm working for a certain shop, an employer, I can do it based on experience. And if it's a shop or even the military working on aircraft, depending on where you are working on the aircraft. For example, if I'm in the Air Force and I work in a power plant shop, meaning that the engines come off the aircraft, they come to my area, and it's my job to dismantle, reassemble, or dismantle, test, inspect, reassemble, put it on and return to service aircraft engines. The FAA will give you an authorization to take a test for a power plant rating. Same thing for airframe. If I'm working as a crew chief, for example, under the MOS or AFSC code, and I have a video on that also, then you could be issued a airframe rating. And then within the codes itself, in the FAA orders, I talk about this in my How to Be an A&P Mechanic video. The FAA can issue the authorization to take the writtens. Pass the writtens, you can take the oral and practicals. Okay? Once you're done with that, once we meet the recency of experience, and I'll show you that in a second, it said you just can't go through and get a certificate to go work on aircraft. Okay? The certificate, we used to say, is a license to learn. It's not a joke. It is. I hate to say it. Not a joke. Okay? But that's a person who can perform maintenance. Meaning, remember we go back to Part 90 where it said that person that is authorized to return the aircraft to service after maintenance. And that's done with a specific maintenance entry in part that is described in FAR 43.9. We keep on going. Hey, a holder of a repairman certificate may perform maintenance. Absolutely. And that gets back to also an it depends question. We're going to talk about in a second what it takes to be a repairman certificate, but not everybody who's working in general aviation who holding a repairman certificate can work on any aircraft they want to. It has to be tied to their employer. And I'll show you that in a second. Paragraph D of Part 43.3 allows anybody who's working under the supervision of a mechanic. And I go through and say mechanic. You could be a repairman, but again, it gets into the caveats of where the repairman is working. Okay? But if I am, for example, I have this all the time. If I am doing an annual inspection for a customer, okay, and part of the annual inspection is to remove and open all panels, I can have the aircraft owner come in and open panels, perform lubrication. I gave them the maintenance documents. I showed them the tools and equipment. I am supervising that individual, not as an IA, as a mechanic, because I have to be a mechanic to be an IA, an inspection authorized. So I could let the owner of an aircraft, I could let somebody from a high school perform maintenance because you have a certificated individual under supervision. If you read that regulation of 43.3 thoroughly, it talks about supervision of an A&P or repairman within that system. The other person that gets down on the list, I don't think I pulled it up here. Yeah, I did. The other persons that can perform maintenance, and the FAA identifies persons as a broad definitions. Another person is somebody who holds a repair station certificate. Now, there's some repair stations that you have to be able to do maintenance, where the A&P certificate is totally out of your authorizations to do under your A&P. As an A&P mechanic, an aircraft mechanic, I can do pretty much anything to an aircraft, except I cannot repair, overhaul propellers, and I cannot repair, overhaul instruments. So propellers and instruments are two specific exclusions that are not allowed to be done under the privileges of an A&P mechanic. However, an A&P or power plant mechanic can install a propeller, and an airframe mechanic can install an instrument and do the leak check that goes with that, and do the systems check. It's just the component repair. These are the two situations where you must have a repairman certificate, but it's certificated. Now, it gets further down the list, and I'm not going to go through and go further, but we talk about preventative maintenance. There is a whole big section in this regulation to talk about what preventative maintenance is. In fact, we have an appendix in 43 that describes preventative maintenance, what a pilot owner can do to their own aircraft, and the limitations on that, using elementary tools and processes and having done it before, either attending a training school or being shown how to do preventative maintenance. And there's a whole big list of things in there. The last thing that can be done, and this is a very, very careful caveat here, again, getting back to under what FAA issued certificate can somebody perform maintenance. A manufacturer may do certain things that are specific to the manufacturer's product. They can rebuild or overhaul. Specifically, they really cannot rebuild or reconstruct. I've got to be careful about my names here. They cannot repair. Reason being is they can take their product completely apart. They can go through and put it on the assembly line again, and then most of them do, and then they'll go through and rebuild the part and replacing components, no matter their wear, to meet this rebuilt or overhaul definition of the parts. They don't really have to, they will clean things and stuff like that, but in the interest of the rule, they can basically take their parts to either new or like new condition. And I don't want to get into that right now, but a manufacturer can do a limited amount of maintenance on the aircraft, specific titles. Okay, that's 43.3. We get a little bit further. Remember, we talked about persons authorized to approve aircraft return to service after maintenance. Who could do it? Okay, and they get very, very specific. I said it before. Holder of a mechanic certificate can approve for return to service after maintenance. Now, an IA in the rule is actually talking about performance of an inspection. And that actually gets into a 43.9, but 43.7 says that an IA can do that. Virtual the fact that an IA will hold a mechanic certificate. We'll get in another section here that talks about, as an IA, I'm doing an inspection, not maintenance. A repair station, absolutely. A holder of a repair station certificate based on the rating that's given may approve for return to service based on what they can do. And in a repair station certificate, believe it or not, there needs to be at least one repairman in their certificate to be able to do that return to service for whatever the repair station's rating. So if I have an A&P mechanic, then they could do return to service under an airframe rated repair station. If I have a instrument shop, nobody there needs to have an A&P. They just have to have somebody who does the final return to service statement, signing off the 8130. Then the return to service document, serviceable tag, if you will, then they have to have a Part 65 certificate. So I've got whole large repair stations that do nothing but avionics work, but nobody with an A&P. Why? They don't need one. They're working under the repairman certificate, which is what we're going to get to in a moment. And then also manufacturers, again, can do what limited things that manufacturers can do. But this is a big one here. The holder of an air carrier operating certificate. So in the U.S., there's two types of air carriers that we can think of. We know the big ones, the airlines, United, the Deltas, the Southwest Airlines. Those are the Part 121 air carriers. But also an air carrier operating is also the Part 135s. And these are the individuals that are charters, the smaller operators, the 10 or less. And you could have 135, 10 or more. but we think of the more of the Flying Wild Alaska, and he goes through and takes customers out in his Cessna 185 into the bush. He's a Part 135. Okay, they, as the air carrier, can sign for return to service under the air carrier certificate number. Okay, within those, we'll have certain individuals that are maybe avionics, and this is what we're going to talk about. We talk about an uncertificated person with certain skills, knowledge, and abilities, right, can go to work for certain entities and be certificated by the FAA under Part 65. So if I go too fast, put a message in the block. Also, don't forget to subscribe. Hit that like bell. I'm trying to build up my channel. I really love all you guys. I am up to 2,555 subscribers on the channels. And I'm happy for that. I don't need, 500,000, 300,000 subscribers. I'm not making any money on this thing. I know I'm monetized, but I just enjoy getting out to you all and getting you people ready to come into aviation, because it is going to be a very growing field pretty soon. I had a laugh. Somebody asked me, what's my retirement plan right now? I said, basically, I work until I die. That's my retirement plan. Because right now I'm getting back into working on aircraft again because we're so short aircraft mechanics. And I am pretty good at it. I am also an IA, so that becomes pretty valuable. All right, so now we've moved away from Part 43. So now we need to, Part 43 talked about Part 65 certifications. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but I'm going to go right into Part 6581. Now, if you remember, Part 65 was labeled other than aircrew members. And then you get into it, it's got the usual first section. It talks about the eligibility, and 6512 says don't make a false statement, things like that. Then they get into all the other than aircrew member certifications. So we do get down to paragraph D of that Part 65 when we start talking about a mechanic. So we'll start off under 6581, general privileges and limitations. So we're talking about A&P mechanics. So a certificated mechanic may perform or supervise the maintenance, right? And then it goes into A, and then there's a bunch of things that they could do for aircraft. And then B, may not exercise that privileges, certificates, and rating unless that person understands the current instructions of the manufacturer's maintenance manuals for the specific operation. So this is the part in 65 that this is a change actually to the rule a little bit to make sure that anybody who's working on aircraft, Part 91 now, that mechanic must either have experience in or training for the work that they're going to be doing. Okay? So that's Part 6581. But I want to keep going because we talk about eligibility requirements. Okay, under general, we're in 65101, eligibility requirements. Again, be specifically qualified to perform maintenance on aircraft or components thereof appropriate to the job for which they employ. Now, the question is, when people get to field, what does that mean? Specifically or specially qualified to perform, either through experience or through training, or a combination of both. Experience and training means you've worked someplace under supervision, or training meaning you've gone to a formal school. However, keep in mind, 147 doesn't count for training, believe it or not. A 147 curriculum to get your A&P certificate, that only counts to get the certificate. Okay, I know a lot of people like to, I did carburetors in A&P school. It doesn't count because there's no requirement in carburetor class to really use specific or current maintenance manuals at A&P school. So what it does, it allows the school to use older carburetors with older data or create their own data for training for the mechanics. It's not until you get into the real world and you're working on active aircraft, currently flying aircraft with current airworthiness certificates. Now, of course, there's exceptions for that, because some A&P schools actually will maintain airworthy aircraft. If they do, then that experience, separate from the original curriculum, can be used as training to go on to work for your next company. Otherwise, you're talking about either an OJT program, all right, or OJT just process. So you'll have a written record of your maintenance training, or formal training being sent to the manufacturer, or being sent to specialty schools or taking online training. All that stuff counts to be able to meet that number 2 element. Be specifically qualified to perform maintenance on aircraft components and thereof, appropriate for which you're employed. And then the other part under eligibility requirements, this is interesting here. And I'm sorry, I need to preface something. 65101 is talking about repairman certificates, not AMPs, excuse me. AMPs are the same thing, but repairman certificates is 65101. And that last part in each of those lines says for which they are to be employed. I went through and typed up, used to say he. And 2, be employed for a specific job requiring those special qualifications by a certificated repair station or by a certificated commercial operator or certificated carrier. So a couple things I need to caveat here. One, sorry, didn't say it was part 65101, but then again, I'll clear this in post. And 2, this is a repairman certificate. A repairman certificate is only going to be valid for the company that person is employed. Either a repair station or a commercial operator, a 135 or a 121, 135 commercial operator. The only repairman certificate I can be issued outside of 145 repair stations, 121 airlines, 135 is for an experimental aircraft as the person that I'm allowed. I built the airplane. I've built 51% of the aircraft actually. Then I can get a repairman to do my own annual inspection or yearly inspection, safety inspection of the aircraft. Okay? Repairman can only be issued to somebody who's working for a certificated system or airline. Okay, which is great. Then that's our opening. I can't, as an avionics technician, go out and start working in Part 91. Unless, a lot of unlesses here, unless I'm working under the direct supervision in Part 91 of an A&P mechanic. Okay, so then I just become every other uncertificated person working on the aircraft. In other words, I'm an avionics person. I've got skills and ability that maybe the mechanic doesn't have, even though we went back and said the mechanic had to have that. But the FAA doesn't mind avionics technicians who people are learning at avionics who are working under an AMP to get some experience working on an aircraft under an AMP. So that's a start. But if I work for an airline or I get hired with a repair station, these companies will have training programs and they'll have quality systems and they'll have manual procedures approved by the FAA specifically designed to take people with minimal qualifications. Military people are great. People who work in industry, like my friend who just sent me the message, he said he worked in building maintenance. That's great. Has some experience in basic electricity. These are foundational processes that an employer can use to build on that and then take, again, getting the training out from the 145s or from the airlines. When I go work for an airline, if I'm going to be performing maintenance, whether it's avionics or maintenance, they're going to give me what's called the GEMFAM class for the airplane I'm working on or the system I'm working on. So that's the benefit of the repairman. That's where I'm going to be going or aiming myself to work without an A&P certificate. Okay. Let's keep on going. So that's the key 2 words, employed by. So we talked about FAA 91. Now, if I'm going to work on an aircraft on the ramp, an A&P can absolutely work on an airplane on the ramp. An inspection authorization holder, an IA, actually, they can only work on the ramps in Part 91. So me as an IA, I've got 2 jobs. I could either do an annual inspection, right? Not including returning to service after I find a discrepancy. That's a maintenance job. But I do the inspection, write up the discrepancies, or if I'm a repairman, asterisk, who is working for a repair station doing customers that are Part 91. So I'm a 145 certificate, and I'm doing, let's say I'm doing avionics installs for a repair station that have an airframe rating. Then a repairman can do his or her own inspections of the avionics installations. They can sign for their own work. Why? Because the repair station has its process to make sure that all repairmen are trained and qualified and knowledgeable, just like the A&Ps, to do the work they're going to be doing while they're employed. One other thing I need to mention, I know a lot of people say, oh, I can just go through and get a 91, 411, 413 repair station. Boom, I got a repairman certificate. Yes. However, that is going to be issued under what the FAA calls limited specialized service, which means you'll have Appendix E, Appendix F as your data to perform maintenance. You don't have to have, complete maintenance manuals for every aircraft you're going to be working on, because under limited specialized service, you won't have specific aircraft that you're going to be rated to work on. You're going to be doing an evaluation under 91, 411, 91, 413, whether it's the IFR or the correlation check for the transponder. But one thing I want to mention here, I know it's a repairman certificate. It's issued for a repair station. However, it is not a maintenance certificate. A limited specialized service is what it is. It's very limited to the specialized service of doing certifications, 24-month certifications for an altimeter or an altimeter or a pressure reporting system. Okay. What I mean by that is, and we talked about people before, and we had this argument in the office, if that 91, 411, 413 goes past 2 years, right, 24 calendar months, is the aircraft unairworthy? And the answer is nope. That's why they don't consider it a maintenance action. You're not doing a return to service after maintenance. You're doing a certification test. It's an operational issue, because if that 2-year certification goes out of date, then the aircraft is unairworthy. It's an operational. The pilot just simply knows, hey, I can't fly into Class B airspace above 10,000 feet, etc., wherever you need that certification. Okay, so we'll get into that in another section. So repairman on that list is an asterisk. So where to next? So the question that I had, and from the viewer, and little about basic electricity. You could always learn more basic electricity, even if you understand the safety issues. Working in building maintenance is always a great experience, because it gives you that industrial safety experience that you need to work around aircraft. A lot of general subjects, for example, understanding electrostatic damage, ESD damage when handling avionics equipment. That can be learned also when working on trucks, cars, electrical systems. The basic use of tools, that's a great thing to have when coming. That's what you're going to build on your career to be able to get a job somewhere in aviation. So you have that. So what I did is I went through and I answered them. And I said, let me go back to my slide here. I'll read the reply. And I'm also going to have the reply, this reply letter put in the comment section below, because I have some links that talk about what I'm trying to do in my school and with these videos, is to try to generate interest in wanting to improve yourself to get that job, either at Boeing or at the airlines or within a repair station, etc. So the first thing I talk about says, thank you for your question. First, I need to point out that the FAA does not endorse or otherwise accept the NCATT certification as qualifications to perform maintenance or authorizations to perform maintenance. They still have to be issued by the FAA. Again, airframe, power plant, inspection authorization, or repairman. Those are basically the maintenance certificates that the FAA are going to issue to allow people to do that 43 return to service, 437 return to service statement. So I know he says FAA NCATT, but it's actually NCATT. NCATT was designed to provide a minimum knowledge base. And the NCATT AET was twofold. One, it was to teach the knowledge base for generals, A&P generals. A lot of the subjects that are in the NCATT AET are aircraft structure, how an aircraft flies, primary flight controls, secondary flight controls. We talk about basics of blueprints and drawings, It gets into corrosion, being able to recognize corrosion. These are what I would call an abbreviated version of the FAA General's course. The other third of the test for NCATT AET was actually a really more broad knowledge of the basic electricity course with enough added information with digital and radio that allows you to move into the add-on ratings, which will become very important here. So the NCATT AET is a great knowledge base because you could go through and tell people, well, it's basically, I know A&P generals. In my opinion, I think anybody who works on an aircraft should know A&P generals subjects. Because you go and look at it, anybody who works on an aircraft, there's a lot of safety information that everybody who works on an aircraft should know right away. And it could be taught on the AET course or the general's course. Okay. Now, one add-on rating and the AET, the FAA has authorized repair stations to be able to use people who have, again, depending on where they're working, to be able to use the NCATT AET and the add-on ratings and radio communications, onboard safety systems, and audio control. I've got textbooks, and I'll talk about that here in a second. That can be used to be issued the basis for a Repairman certificate. So the FAA does recognize and understand the NCATT AET, and I have a letter from the FAA AFS 300, which is the group, the part of the FAA that's in charge of policy for aircraft maintenance. Okay, so that's a good thing. So that does have value because it also can be sold during an interview. If you get an interview with these companies to say, I've got an NCATT AET and I have these add-on ratings. And I'll talk about the add-on ratings here in a second. Actually, I could probably start talking about it now. The add-on ratings build on the AET. For example, I have a book on the radio communications add-on rating. The beauty of that book is that takes us from the AET where we created a AC wave, right, which can be used for both power generation or can be used for radio frequency, RF energy. Then I take it to the add-on rating, which talks about radio frequency ranges, right? Each of them travels at different speed directions and have different properties based on the frequency and the power. We talk about aircraft antennas and locations in that book. We also talk about basic system operation. There is a section in there on, for example, that hands-on stuff I'll talk about in a second, how to build a coax connector, how to generally read an electrical schematic, things like that are part of the add-on rating for radio communications. Then you would go to the rest of my school that I taught before into the systems knowledge, and I'll talk about that here in a second. So the other ratings we have are for the NCATT certification. Again, autonomous navigation systems. So autonomous navigation systems actually was pretty good. That is actually keyed up in my what I would call the Aircraft's Electrician Handbook that I created. It was volume 1. I've only created one volume. So just think of it like the Mel Brooks film, History of the World Part 1, where the joke was he really hadn't done a Part 2 yet. Because Part 2, I covered pulse radio systems, and I have a book for that. I'll talk about that here for a second. But also in that book, I talk about other systems that are important to an avionics technician, including engine indicating, right? Engine indicating, fuel quantity in both the float systems and the capacitance systems. I also talk about pedostatic systems and gyro systems in that book. That all gets part of that autonomous navigation system, also into inertial reference and other these combination units. Now, I have a separate book because my books are written based on my program, based on the classes we did for glass cockpit that got into the more advanced glass cockpit displays that were fed from air data computers, etc. So not specifically an NCATT certificate rating, but knowledge base. So we keep on going. So I describe a lot of that in my YouTube videos, even my little short videos that I talk about individual systems like compass swings. I talk about a mechanical compass swing, but if you want to learn about electronic compass swings, that is in my Avionics Handbook, Avionics Technician Handbook, Volume 1. And there's more information. I guess I have links in the description below. I also talk about the benefits of FCC. There are certain tasks that you have to have an FCC certificate for. And I went through, and in my video here talking about FCC, that I have to have the FCC and a radar endorsement if I am going to be modifying or working on an aircraft radar system. Because a radar system on a ship is really similar to an radar system on a boat. And the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, does require a GRAL, a General Radar Operator's license, to be able to work on those systems. So the FCC is still valid in working on aircraft that you'll be handling the radar units. Not the inside the box, but just dealing with the waveguides and things like that. So it's pretty sparse. Also, airlines like to use the FCC. We were hoping they would use the more NCATT certificates with the add-on ratings to be able to replace the FCC, but a lot of airlines, especially when I was working early on, would actually use the FCC for license premiums for avionics technicians that don't have A&Ps. I thought it was unfair. The one airline I worked at, I had an A&P and an FCC, but I only got one license premium. Didn't get 3. That's just the way it is. So I have no problem with that. So I go down in the letter and I said, well, what do you need to do now? I have no experience in aviation. I want to get into aviation. So I need to go through and put down on my resume to attract attention. So there's a whole section on the internet talking about keywords that you want to put in your resume that you want to show training of. Now, in aviation or avionics maintenance, there tends to be 3 general subject areas that at least I taught when I was teaching my avionics program. The first one is basic electrical concepts. That was the AET, but we also talk about a little bit of regulations. I taught people how to work within a repair station and an airline, talking about work cards and regulations, just to be able to have something that they could put on their resume to say, I understand the difference between a 145 and an air carrier certificate. And when you're working in that environment, you as a technician need to know the documents that are going to be in your hand. That was the basic electrical concepts. Under the second part that everybody needs to know, and that was the knowledge of electrical wires and interconnects. So we're talking about the subjects that cover electrical connectors. I have a video on this website. I think it's over 12,000 or 11,000 views on how to read an electrical connector. And that actually was part of a 2-week course that I taught. I actually have 4 more sections of that course that talks about not only how to read the connector, but how to use the ATA Chapter 20 standard wiring practice manual, how to order it, how to disassemble it, how to put it together, how to inspect it, how to install it. So that is knowledge of electrical wires and interconnects, and understanding. Also in that section, I talked about the Molex connectors, which are still out there, especially in general aviation, moving to D-sub miniatures or D-subs, which are also now being installed in all the glass cockpit systems, and again, in air carrier all the way down to GA, but also talking about the care and feeding of your antennas and your coaxes that feed the antennas. In addition to knowledge of electrical wires and interconnects, you have to be able to read and interpret electrical schematics. And again, I have textbooks that cover that. Okay? So that's the second part. And the third part is talking about understanding avionic systems. Okay? When I talk about avionic systems, you need to have a good working knowledge and the purpose of and the operation of an aircraft's avionic systems. In other words, being able to recognize what an avionic system is, right? Where are you going to be working? Knowing the ATA chapters is how we break it down. For example, you'll see on my online websites, I have ATA chapters that I'm creating because airlines will understand that ATA Chapter 34 is navigation. ATA Chapter 23 is communication. So they understand the systems in that. So you need to have a good working knowledge of VHF communication. This is the one where the pilot talks to the tower. Also within that book, we talk about audio selection system. We also talk about more advanced audio selection systems in that book for radio communication systems. I have a book on coming out on autopilot systems. I have a book on pulse radio communications. Now, pulse radio communications, there is a course that I put on my Thinkific at the request of repair stations, because they had to repair training, for transponder certification, going back to that Appendix E and F, because the FAA wanted training. And I had an A&P mechanic who was doing ADSB installs, automatic depend. These are the new requirements that had to be done as of a couple of years ago. And he wanted to do the certifications. For him to do the complete install, he had to do the 91, 411, 413 inspections. He tried to get a repair station certificate for it, because technically one of them was an instrument rating. 91, 411 for an altimeter certification required an instrument. Remember, we talked about before that you can't use an A&P certificate to certify an instrument. It has to be an instrument shop or somebody holding a 91, 411. So in addition to that pulse radio class, the pulse radio class was for weather radar, transponder systems, DME, distance measuring equipment. There's a short training course on my website for that, and radio altimeter systems. So, and then I had a 5th chapter on advanced pulse radio systems. So you'll know there's ground proximity warding systems, traffic collision avoidance systems, and also automatic ADSB, automatic dependent surveillance systems. These are the automatic reporting systems, ATC, that puts airplanes on maps without radar. Okay, so that is avionics systems. So you need to have a basic knowledge of that. And again, reading textbooks is a great start. Using an online course is a great start. And I'm just talking to people that want to start from the outside and then come into it with your resume saying, basically, you're self-schooled. What I am doing now is I need help from you and your repair stations and your airlines to tell me what courses you need next. So somewhere, I think on the website, I have an index of what classes I taught by subject. And I do them in Zoom courses. In fact, I just finished a pedostatic system Zoom class that I did for a customer because they were asked to take the transponder course, but they didn't have a working knowledge of pedostatic. So I did a Zoom class for them, a 3-night Zoom class on pedostatic systems. We talked about the 3 pedostatic instruments in the 6-packs, the interconnects, the care and feeding, how to hook it up to a system, all the, we've got a little bit into RVSM too, if you're working on jets and things like that. So I can create Zoom courses on the fly, or you could come and request for an online course, but it takes me time to do the online courses. Okay, all of which are down here. Links are down below in the description. It seems like a lot. I know there's really good money in aviation. The more people we get into aviation, the work environment's going to be better. Right now, the people that are working in aviation are working very hard. The overtime's really good, but the time away from home is hard to swallow sometimes. It's going to get better as we get more people in the system. Right now, we are so short of just about everybody who services aircraft right now. And don't worry, they're not going to turn off airplanes, because I can tell you right now, riding the bus still sucks, okay, or driving cars. Airplanes always represent time machines. And if I have a 3-day weekend, I am not going to go very far driving for a vacation on a 3-day weekend. But I can get on a jet and be in the Bahamas in a few hours and then come back and still be time for work. If I'm going to be awake for work, that's another story. But I'm going to have a good time. People are going to fly. Time is money. So the pay will have to go up accordingly, which is your incentive to get the training, to start putting your resumes together to convince people that you're going to be a good fit for their company. So just by obtaining training, self-training, it's tough. I understand. Doing an online course is tough. But all of my courses include tests. So they allow you to do your self-test and knowledge. If you miss something, go back and pretty much within my courses, when you're signed up to my online courses, you can take them as many times as you want to within usually 3 to 6 months. It depends on how much you pay for the course. Or you could renew. If you have I know the NCATT course is really long that I have. I just have one half of the NCATT course with videos. That takes a long time, and sometimes I'll do for 6 months, but people ask me for 3 months, and I'll extend for 3 months if they're active in the course. And you could always ask me about any questions. Okay, like everything else, there were people that showed up to their first day at work at Boeing when I was there last year that had never worked on aircraft, but they had the basic knowledge to build on. And then the company itself is responsible to make sure you're trained. So take that training that you can get on your own and then carry it on with the training you're going to get for who you work for. And it's been a great career. I'm not done with it yet, and I'll still be in it. So like I said before, thank you for spending the last 53 minutes with me. If you have any questions or comments, please put it in the comment section below. Again, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and tell your friends. I know I have 2,500 subscribers. You think I'd be getting more views on the videos. I should say that on my live feeds. I try to do live feeds every other Thursday if I have something to work on. I did this as a video straight up because I want to do a little bit of editing. But I still read everybody's comments when they come out. So we will see you in the next one. And then, like I said, if I get enough comments, we could bring up the comments from the live feed coming up. With that being said, hey, thanks for sticking with me this long. And would have to say, keep it safe and good luck out there.